All right, so we're now going to start the hot topics session, and this will consist of highlights from the working group and subcommittee reports and proposed initiatives. But before I start this, we have two quick things. One, I want to give a little shout out to our sponsors, and then Lindsay Cowell wants to mention something, right, Lindsay? So let me just do the shout out to the sponsors first, and then Lindsay, you can make your comment. So I just also wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the sponsors for this meeting, especially Distributed Bio, which has been a partner of the AIR community for several years. And Jacob Glanville has been very generous to us over the years. And of course, JP is also part of that group. And so they've given generously, not only in terms of financial support, but also in terms of effort, really, for our community. And so I really want to thank them for that. They have some fascinating algorithms that they're working on in antibody engineering. If you look at their website, it's a very, very exciting time, and they've been developing antibody therapeutics for COVID-19, among other things. So I really encourage you to take a look. Of course, these other partners, you can see I've listed a few of the names of the folks who may be at the meeting that you can reach out to. For Adaptive Biotechnologies, there will be a talk at the software tools demonstration tomorrow. The Antibody Society, of course, has been spectacular for us. We are part of them. They are part of us. Jan Reichert and Paul Perrin, the current president of their group, have both helped us in many ways, many more than I can describe here. NPCOM is another exciting up-and-coming company for decoding the immune system, and we have several folks that we've been talking to with them. And last but not least, Simon Fraser University, which has been there for us from the beginning, and not only, again, in terms of financial support, but also people within the AIR community. Really, several of our founding members hail from there. So again, thanks to our sponsors. And now I want to turn it over to Lindsay for a moment, for her to mention some things.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I just wanted to reiterate something from the Common Repository Working Group session. So the question came up about, like, if you have data, how do you share it? And we mentioned several options, one being you can have your data shared for you through the VDJ server infrastructure. You can also have your data shared as a repository through the iReceptor system. And there's documentation and processes available. What I wanted to reiterate is that please don't let that be a hurdle or a barrier to sharing, because both groups and the Common Repository Working Group have staff available to help you. And we'll do our best to make it a seamless process rather than a burdensome process. So if you have data and you want to share it, please just reach out to us, and don't worry that it's going to be like a huge laborious process. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay, for that clarification. And we'll have the opportunity to talk about that a little bit more in the vignettes here. So what I'm going to need a little bit of help from the panelists. Please interrupt me if people have questions or comments, because I'm in full screen mode and can't see them. So please, JP or others, Davide, just shout out if people have comments, so that way we can make this more interactive. So what I wanted to do in the next several minutes was walk through 7 different proposals that in some cases span one or more of the subcommittees and working groups, and open them up for a little bit more discussion. So the first, and I'm going to go roughly in order of the meeting, but in some cases I'm going to break with the meeting order because some topics seem to fall together a little bit more naturally. So bear with me here, but we'll see how this goes. So the first thing that came up was the proposed reorganization of minimal standards data representation and some data-oriented parts of the Common Repository Working Groups into a single new working group with an umbrella, a broader purview that would be named the Standards Working Group. And I think this was a very seemed like a very non-controversial suggestion. If there are any comments from the audience about this, please raise them. But I think the consensus, at least from the discussion thus far, has been that this seems like a good idea, and it seems not only to be a good idea, but it actually seems to be working, and has already stood a little bit of the test of trial and error and so on. Now, another component to this, however, is how, it's one thing to define the standards, and this is an awful lot of work, of course, but another is how do we promote their adoption? And this is something that is a broader endeavor in terms of, again, involving multiple groups and subcommittees, and I think can span partnerships with companies, with other groups such as Euroclonality, IUIS, involves outreach to journal, outreach to funding agencies. So the first thing I'd like to pause here for a minute and see if there are any comments from the audience or the panelists about this adoption piece. Any suggestions for how we can further promote the standards?
We have Johannes Struck in the chat. Promote adoption as reviewers of journal articles. So if we are reviewers, I guess that's what he's meaning. If we are reviewers on journal articles that contain AIRR-C data, that we point the authors to the relevant resources. I think for our committee and community, it is also important that we have a go-to website or something like a resource where we can find all this information quickly. Because if you're in the process of reviewing an article, you don't necessarily want to spend another hour trying to figure out where all this information is that you need to send out to those authors, right? So if we have one go-to website, I think that's what we want to do, one go-to website as part of the comms committee on our AIR community website that just lists all these resources so they're quickly available for everyone that needs it. Those
are both excellent ideas, and many of us who do review manuscripts do encourage adoption of AIR standards. So that, yes, and I like the idea very much of a sort of one-stop shop, and certainly that there's been a lot of work on that already. Any other comments?
Yes, we have a question from George Blank. You can talk now.
Hi, George.
Yes, I just, with regard to outreach to journals, just wanted to underscore Lindsay's comments with regard to having a lot of opportunity to make data deposits in a relatively convenient manner, especially if it's the first or second time you've done it. And I would even go so far as to say that if, again, a lot of the technical stuff is out of my range, but I would go so far as to say I think people would be even more inclined to want to participate in the process when they're responding to reviewers and getting their manuscripts in shape if there's some kind of an intermediate status where the data can just be provided to either BDJ server or whatever part of the AIR community is going to receive the data, pretty much in any form that it's in, like for example in Excel files, and be held in some kind of escrow, if you will, where the community can respond and say, yes, we have the data. We don't know how long it's going to take to get it into shape, to upload it, etc., make it convenient. But we have the data, we have it in raw form, and however long it takes, we will maintain the data. Something along those lines.
Well, I think, I mean, when you do an AIR compliant submission, one of the things that you do is submit some of the data. You know, you can submit it to SRA, for instance, and get a project number. And so I think many people, when they do these submissions, that's what our lab does. For example, we say, we open up a project number and then we upload the data. And that's sort of the first step. But then if I'm understanding you right, you're saying maybe there could be other steps like this for getting the data more fully fleshed out in AIR compliant form sooner rather than later. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, from my point of view, frankly, I'd turn over my entire computer to anybody who wants to look through my computer. But where things can get challenging is when the reviewers are saying, we want these standards to be met. You know, we get this a lot with code. Has your code been fully commented? It's not commented enough, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, you know, our hearts are in the right place, but a lot of this can quickly become what are the standards for communicating to the scientific community what it's like to make a buffer in a wet lab situation. You know, you want to give all the information, but there's still a sort of practiced in the art expectation on the part of the receiver. And I just think it's going to take maybe a little bit of extra just appreciation of the novices that are involved in this process in order to really get to the high-end data transparency and data convenience status, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it also it segues nicely into another topic that I want to get to, which is financial support and whether there are ways that we can maybe help people with some of these things like their data uploads. If there's so hold that thought, because in terms of making things more user friendly, the challenge, of course, is, you know, time and energy and all that. And so that those things tend to cost money. So let's revisit that in a moment. Are there any other comments before we move on? Because there's actually quite a bit more.
Yes. Just one quick adding to that.
Yeah.
If people have problems with their data submission, the Slack channel is there for that too. So we have this opportunity to directly communicate, to connect you with experts in the field, which are basically our community members that have done this stuff before, and they can help you out with that very quickly.
Yep.
So we have from William Lees in the chat, perhaps tie standard adoption with the badges as used for software tools.
Excellent idea. I like that. Yeah.
And then Encarnita says, back to the journals and articles, having a sentence relative to data submission following AIR standards. Yes, I agree with that.
Yep. In fact, that's one of our standard boilerplates. These data were submitted in compliance with AIR community standards or something like that, right? We could even write something that people can put into the back end of their papers or methods sections. Yeah. Yes,
and I like your like subsequent comment on that as well. Sharing the SRA AIR compliant file on the AIR website is perfect, because if you want to like use the data for reprocessing or for adding it to your own study, it is super helpful if there's just the go-to file with all the SRA information and all the metadata associated, and just pump it into a script and then like download and process the data in one go. That is something that is greatly missed for especially the older studies that were uploaded into SRA, where basically nobody knows what is what, right? It's very difficult to figure that out.
Yep. Okay, so let me move on, because this actually segues very well into the next one, which is to promote the incorporation of additional data and databases into the AIR Data Commons. So I think this was a huge topic, right? That I think spanned the presentations of multiple working groups, but I think we heard several proposals for how to do this. So I'll just briefly summarize my very 30,000 foot view of this, and then we're going to let experts chime in. So what are some of the goals here? Well, one that was articulated was to develop an AIRR-seq repository registry, which is a great idea. It's like, so who are we targeting to try to get into the AIR Data Commons? Here's a list of who's out there, right? And then how can we get some of these databases and data uploads to proceed? Well, so we can proceed via sort of higher and lower level expertise, right? So people can upload data into VDJ server, or they can do it in a more turnkey way, maybe via other mechanisms. I mean, VDJ server certainly has that. iReceptor also has a turnkey repository. You can have reference implementations maybe as a GitHub repository. So by references, I mean sort of reference sequences that might be of interest. So you could have data sets, including synthetic data sets for testing of analysis tools and evaluation of immune repertoire data that could be uploaded as well into the AIR Data Commons. And then you could develop tools for querying across different AIR compliant repositories. So it doesn't all have to go, it doesn't all have to flow through VDJ server or iReceptor or ImmuneDB or 20 other ones. There's a whole, the vision eventually is to have a series of these repositories that can be queried so that you can pull data from all of these different repositories, right? So that's kind of the fantasy, I think, in terms of and the vision for what we want to achieve. And so how do we get there? And so I want to really open this up for discussion by the people who know more of the details. But that's really, I think, what we want is to know which databases are out there, figure out how to join them together, how to query them, develop tools for querying them, and then also have outreach to other sources of data where the databases may not be as obvious, but where the data nevertheless do likely exist, right? So so those are some ideas there. So let's open this up for some comments, because I'm sure there will be some.
Yeah, so we have a bunch already coming in. One thing that I want to highlight right away is what Scott Christie put in the chat. I think it's a great idea. How about having a curation-a-thon in, symbiosis with a hackathon, where we gather and curate a set of studies as a group and then put those studies together in the ADC. I think that's a fantastic idea, and we could even think about adding that to our next meeting as a pre-meeting, as a workshop, right? Just meet up all the people that are involved in these kind of things. And have like a half-a-day meeting or something where we just make great headway on that.
Yeah, fantastic idea. Go ahead.
Yes, we have Brian on the attendee list. I just added you to speaker, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just in case there are questions that I could answer about the repository side of things.
Please do. Yes. So what other questions are coming in here, JP?
So Jason added to that idea of Scott. If you keep a spreadsheet data in the AIR rearrangement standard, then the upload to AIC should be trivial. It's just a matter of saving the Excel doc as a tab delimited text file with unique identified sequence ID column. I think that would be the easiest path for kind of a pre-publication sharing of process data. So that's kind of ties into the part where we have to document these things in an easy, accessible way for our members and people that want to perform these uploads. And Jason kindly just put the relevant web link into the chat as well. So everyone who's here, just save that one into your bookmarks, because that really has all the information that you need. And we're gonna also put that on our website if it's not already there. Chaim added that whether we would need somebody to judge if you actually met the requirements to make that statement that you are AIR compliant in a publication. That is something that we probably need to talk about extensively, how we want to verify that in the course of a manuscript being accepted with the data in concordance to the standard. So if anyone has any comments on that, please go ahead.
Just to comment on the data standard side of thing, Chaim raised a question kind of offline about loading data, and I reviewed the documentation about if you have data that you want to share, what do you do? And it's a bit lacking, I think. So that's something definitely that we can work on to make that a little bit more clear to people about what the options are, depending on what they want to do with sharing.
Yes, Chaim also raised his hand, so please go ahead, Chaim.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Brian said about the conversation we'd started offline. The documentation I think really focuses on getting the process data into GenBank to match getting the raw data into SRA or equivalent repositories, and it may be that GenBank, which was always not a great fit, but now with the maturation of the ADC, maybe that we need to focus more on getting stuff into the ADC and worry less about GenBank.
Yeah, we actually made some changes to the some of the bookkeeping changes. Actually, we should have made them more prominent in our in the common repository presentation. But some of the changes we made were more explicit messaging about making sure you share your annotated rearrangements, and we made that more explicit in the recommendations, but it isn't very well documented on the documentation side. Because it used to be very kind of GenBank SRA kind of focused, because we didn't have an AIR Data Commons, so to speak. We were working on it, but now we do, and I think we have to rebuild some of those things.
Yep. So I think this is these are great suggestions to create something that's very clear for people who want to upload their data in an AIR compliant fashion, defining what that is exactly, and encouraging them or requiring them to use an AIR compliant database or data repository that's part of the ADC, right? I mean, eventually that's kind of where we're going. Am I overstating it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, not at all. We have Christian Busse added to the mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to second what Chaim just said, I think we should, over the next year, we should come to a conclusion whether we basically are ready to abandon GenBank as a repository. Because I mean, by now it has become clear, and that's also along the line with funding guidelines, that FAIR is not just a criteria of the isolated data object. It's also a question of the repository it resides in. If GenBank cannot support, or SIA cannot support the metadata that we provide at a sufficient level, then maybe it's really time to move on. But this is then something that should be also prominent within our recommendations, and we need to be aware of the implication this has for the demands that then are on the ADC, because then we need to make sure that there is at least for some time some long-term preservation of the data.
Yeah, exactly. The key there will be sustainability of it. And that's one of the reasons why right now we have things in SRA, right? Even though I completely agree with you that it is far from optimal. Other comments on that?
We have Lindsay
There's
Cowell.
just, oh, sorry. Yeah, I raised my hand because I wasn't sure whether I could unmute myself. I just wanted to follow up on the SRA thing. It is great that we have data in SRA, but I just wanted to point out for those who might not live and breathe AIR data commons that the SRA data are the raw data basically generated by the sequencer, whereas in the AIR data commons, there's process data. So for an individual who wants to query and find data, that should be much easier to do through the AIR data commons using AIR relevant or AIR customized metadata. Beyond that, just to also add that once you download those data and want to work with them in an analysis with the SRA data, you would need to start back at the beginning with the raw data and do all of the processing, which in certain kinds of studies could be a benefit and something that someone wants to do. On the other hand, with the AIR data commons data, you can straight away access things like CDR3 regions, right? You don't have to start back at the very beginning and figure out primers and barcodes and blah, blah, blah. And so that can be a better approach for some studies. So they're complementary approaches, I would say, not redundant at all.
Yeah, I agree. There needs to be a tin can for the raw data that doesn't get corrupted and is sustainable. And that's in a way what SRA is, right? And then there needs to be a user-friendly version where
exactly
people aren't necessarily good at data analysis. But again, you know, for the people who are good at data analysis, you always want to be able to go back to kind of the ground truth. So we definitely need both things. Other comments? I do think the AIR data commons is one of the most important things that the AIR community is doing. So I wanted to give this a fair bit of time. But if there are no further comments, then I have some more things to throw out here. Okay, so one of the other things that has come up that's going to involve multiple AIR community groups is to work on this collaborative chapter, actually 2 chapters for methods in molecular biology. This is this Springer Nature publication where Anton Langerak will be the editor on a special issue on immunogenetics. Just putting this out there so everybody can hear this. So what our proposal is to have 2 chapters that the AIR community would write for this. One would be about study setup. One would be about, you know, on the front end. So that's things like design considerations. Who are you studying? What question are you trying to answer? A lot of the input there might be from the diagnostics working group. What approach will you take? What standards and controls will you need? For that, we would definitely tap the biological resources working group. And then on the back end, okay, you have your data. Well, are the data any good? You know, so that might be a question for the software group to answer. And then how do you share the data, et cetera. So that these two chapters, we'd like to try to coordinate this across the community. And so the plan will be to set up a meeting in early 2021 to plan this submission. And at that meeting, we would identify leads for each of the chapters, and the executive subcommittee would reach out to the working groups and subcommittees about this. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns about that proposed plan?
I think it might be good to know for the members of or for the participants of this meeting on how to participate in that. Like, what do I need to do in order to be part of this effort?
Right. Yeah, so reach out to what would be the easiest way to do this? Can we have actually maybe just put something in the chat that says that you're interested and identify yourself that way, and then Pam, can you help us collect names?
Yeah, I was just going to say we could actually just put a proposal together, like a one quick email that I can send out to the entire list, asking them to reply rather than trying to scramble through the chat for it. We'll just send it as an email afterwards.
Perfect. Pam,
Thanks.
So smart. Excellent. Okay, we will do that. Let's move on.
In the chat, we have had a longer discussion going on about people are posting. It's difficult to read then. About the ways how data can get uploaded and provided and make it very easy for the researcher to publish data in AIR compliance standard. And there's a lot of discussion going on. I suggest everyone can take a look at the chat on how we can facilitate that a lot. And the idea is to just have a basically starting Excel sheet where you can fill in your stuff and have, in addition, the information provided by every tool that is out there on which parameters do I have to set to get AIR compliant data out of it at the end. And then these parameters should also be provided in this meta sheet, so that everyone that wants to reproduce can principally just download the data, pop in the parameters that are in the sheet, and just process it right through from SRA. And at the same time, if you're using the data on the ADC, that you know how it was generated, that you can make it comparable to your own data.
Yep, I love it. These are great. Yeah. These are great suggestions. Thank you, everyone. So we have about, I don't know, 2 minutes left or something. So let me just go through a couple other quick hot topics, but I think these are hot topics. They're obviously gaining some, they're generating some interest. Another one that I think is of interest to many people within our community are financial initiatives. And this is something that the executive subcommittee under my leadership really didn't have a chance to fully work on. And I think it is something that Lindsay, I know, and I are both committed to trying to work on more in the upcoming year. And so I think there are opportunities for raising money and getting support potentially for AIR community working group or subcommittee work. And that I would propose that we do work with TABS and also with generating other funding to develop sort of two general types of funding. One is in the form of some type of infrastructure support, and the other would be in the form of prizes to promote AIR-seq science and data sharing. And I think we highlighted some of these topics in the individual subcommittee and working group reports. But some areas of where it seems, at least to me, that we could use some infrastructure support might be in the AIRRC, might be a programmer for the AIR Data Commons or the software or common repository, might be resources for the communications efforts that are going on for expanding our educational outreach, for website work and other communications work that is really quite time intensive and is being done. Some of it is already being paid for, but a lot of it is being done on a volunteer basis by a series of very committed and passionate people. But I think we need to give a little bit of help maybe. And then last but not least, for the Biological Resources Working Group, which was proposing a comparative study for B-cell AIR-seq. So those are some possible ideas. This is not an all-inclusive or encompassing list, but could we create some form of financial support for AIR community activities? And then the other area would be prizes. So we have talked about this in the executive subcommittee in the past, and this, I think, ties into our desire to try to promote data sharing, and potentially one way to do things like promote data for germline gene submissions and things like that. You know, could we come up with a community-wide prize for somebody who's a good citizen and who does these types of things and doesn't necessarily, some of these things are not necessarily tied to publication, right? But we nevertheless want people to do these things. So how can we encourage them? And then of course we can also encourage scientific discoveries within our community. And so I just want to open that up for some comments. Looks like there's quite a few things going on in the chat. So JP, can you help me out?
Yes, I've just added Jamie to the talkers list because she had a couple of points, I guess, on the financial part.
Okay, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, this is great, Nina. And by the way, I personally don't care if we go over time. So this is so important. Yeah, and that is that, you know, we should also add to this sponsorship, because I think that companies that are backing us, you know, they're kind of giving us money for, quote, supporting meetings. We actually don't need that much money supporting meetings. I think people would really be very excited about putting money into these kinds of efforts, because you're going to report back to them and say, here's what we built. You know, I mean, they like to see this kind of stuff. So I would just add to this that, yeah, TABS could pay for some of it. Maybe it doesn't fit that well with NIH, but we can certainly get private money, I think, for these kinds of things. And secondly, I think that it's true that IUIS and besides TABS and probably Focus could also start focusing a little bit more on this kind of infrastructure, including, you know, even IMGT infrastructure that needs to be more broadly shared and supported. And these guys have money, so why not?
Yeah, all good points. And again, the note about TABS, you're absolutely right. That's not the only source of funding. And so, yes, completely agree. And again, this is not an all-encompassing list either. It was just something to get the conversation started. Other comments, JP?
So would that be headed by the exec of the AIR community?
Yes, I think in terms of figuring out where you know, how to get the money, but also where it should go, should be an executive subcommittee function.
Okay, great. Because I have, you know, one or two people reaching out to me from companies that say, well, we don't really just want to sponsor the meeting. If there's a possibility to become a corporate sponsor, for example, just, you know, pump some money into the AIR initiative that can be used for whatever you guys need it for. Yeah. They would be very much excited about that. And we have to put down a framework on what that in return means for you if you become a corporate sponsor of the AIR community. TABS has that already lined out, but it doesn't always quite fit with what we want in terms of the communication there. So we maybe have to adjust that a little bit, and we have to make clear where we draw the line between TABS and AIR. I don't want to actually make any lines in between our two initiatives because they're very much working together in a lot of ways. But I think it is important for some companies that say, well, we just do AIR, we don't do antibodies, which is
right. No, you're
say,
right.
But, you know.
You're right. You're right. And the thing is, the Antibody Society is a trade organization. It's a little bit different in flavor from the AIR community, sure, which has a bit more of an academic and you know, and also industrial component, but it's a little bit different. Now, of course, the two are linked, right? The AIR community is a committee within TABS, and we are very much, it's, as you say, it's a very symbiotic partnership. And so we're very grateful to TABS for their support, but we can also, I think, seek out support from other sources that are more earmarked for AIR community initiatives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And we have Jan on the list of attendees. So if Jan, if you have anything to add to that, please just raise your hand and I'll allow you to speak. The chat, meanwhile, has completely
exploded,
changed topics into ADC and data standards. I think this is something that we probably have to take up in the working groups itself, because it's getting pretty concrete on how we how we actually format data and use it as such to facilitate ADC submission and SRA submission at the same time by re-engaging with the care people. So these are great initiatives.
Yes, so this is what we were hoping. I'm so excited about this. This is exactly what we were hoping this session would do, was to generate a lot of interaction between the different members of the community and the attendees today. So thank you all for actively engaging, and let me just move on then to the next topic real quick.
There was one thing real quick that I just saw on the chat. Catherine Skipper said that she warrants student prizes for submission of data, germline gene data, or germline genes, or scientific discoveries around AIRR-C would be a great way to uplift students into the AIRR-C, but also promote this kind of work as well. I think this is a fantastic idea because a lot of, as we heard today many times, we have a lot of different species that aren't very well annotated in terms of AIR germline data. And so if there is any students working in that field, that would be a great way to, kind of reward them for their hard work on this, because it's not necessarily a topic that easily gets you a high impact factor publication. If you say, well, I completely realigned the mouse germline genes for this particular substrain. But for us, it is truly important that we have these kind of things happening. And I see Janice right here has also asked to talk.
Go ahead. Jan?
There we go.
Not hearing.
I see she's unmuted, but we still don't hear you, Jan.
While she's unmuting, Nina, why don't you introduce Jan, because I'm not sure that everyone knows who she is.
So Jan Reichert is the director. I have to get her exact title right, which I'm not sure I can do right now.
Executive director.
Executive director. Thank you. I was like, director, is it exec? Okay. She's the executive director of the Antibody Society, and the Antibody Society, the AIR community is part of the Antibody Society, but the Antibody Society has several other committees in it. And Jan is serving actually on several of those committees in addition to her director roles. And has been our main point person for all things AIR community and within TABS. And we are very grateful to her for all her hard work and for all her help over the years in getting us off the ground. So Jan, are you able to speak now? Oh, just heard you for a second. Still muted, looks like.
How about now?
Yes, we hear you. Yay.
Can you hear anything?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about all of the fussing around, because I only had just a couple of little things to say here before you moved on. I just wanted to make a remark about the financial aspect, that if you get corporate sponsors, what we've been saying from the get-go is that if a corporate sponsor comes through and expresses interest specifically in AIRR-C, 100% of whatever they are giving for their corporate support goes into the kitty for the AIR community. So never since time immemorial, when AIR community joined into TABS, has any funding that's specifically earmarked for AIR-C gone anywhere other than directly to AIR-C. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So besides that, of course, we are very happy to help support you however we can with financial assistance for various things, including your educational outreach and communication needs, and help with your prize money and anything else you want. You're doing very, terrific amount of work. We really appreciate the enthusiasm that you bring to these tasks and how incredibly dedicated and remarkable you all are. So we definitely want to support that.
Well, Jan, the feeling is completely mutual, so thank you for that. And yes, I think people in the AIR community should realize that it has been a very nice partnership for us to work with TABS in this way. And yes, and especially working with you, Jan. Thank you so much. So I just
thanks, Jan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pam. I love you too.
Yes, we have a mutual admiration society going here. But in the interest of time, let me try to wrap up a little bit. So we have a couple more quick topics. Germline database working group, but also to some extent AIRRC. I think we heard a lot of very important suggestions, both from Andrew and Corey. Again, I think some of these extend beyond just the germline database and AIRRC initiatives. I think we also heard about the potential of trying to work collaboratively with legal and ethics working group on figuring out how to deal with restrictions and potentially promote the lifting of these restrictions on data sharing that's imposed by some of the regulations in Europe and elsewhere. So I think these are very important initiatives for the community as a whole. I also think in light of the comment that was made earlier about encouraging early career participants in the germline naming initiatives and in AIRRC. Along those lines, more broadly, I think there should be an initiative for reaching out, for doing more outreach to our early career members within the AIR community, see what their needs are, see how to get them more involved in our working groups and subcommittees. And so I think these were some of the suggestions that were made along the way today. So we had, in terms of outreach initiatives, we have, the proposal for podcasts, in collaboration with the meetings subcommittee, other web-based learning and outreach and communications subcommittee was discussing that. And again, some of these things can also occur in collaboration with TABS. And focus was another thing that was mentioned, was to consider the option of running a satellite symposium as part of a focus meeting to get the message out to a broader community within the immunology and in translational research. And then again, in terms of the younger members, questionnaire to student members, maybe to include postdoctoral fellows in that, and more participation of sort of, trying to train sort of the next generation. AIRR-seq, the AIRR-seq field is in and of itself young, but I think we also want to maintain it and grow the ranks, if you will, who adopt this from early on in their training. So those were some of the proposals for educational and outreach initiatives. Any comments on those?
Yes, in the chat we have Jamie Scott, who wanted to add the note that TABS will be becoming international affiliate member of IUIS. The board of directors voted to move ahead on that last November. So that is just an add-on to our joint function together with TABS. And then we have Ankarnita adding in the chat, Nina, could we do more on education, for instance, reaching out to master's and PhD programs? And I think that is a great point, because do actual programs in that field even exist? And if so, what are they named, right? And how do we bring them into the flock at the source?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it's also one that might emerge a little bit with, TABS has a mission statement that they've been revising. And one of the things in that mission statement comes, it focuses on the education of trainees at various stages in their careers. And going, so why not go further back and try to get master's or PhD students into that educational portfolio? Yeah, absolutely.
Jenny added that the comms subcommittee could help set up webinar series for PhD and master programs, and I think that ties in nicely with what we've proposed as a 2021 goal for the comms committee that we have these webinars that TABS was so generous to support financially. And if we, tie them up into different levels, let's say, of what AIRR-C means, like parts of our community, parts of the work that you do like in the field, right? Actually doing AIRR-C analysis, and then we can go even one step further back and do the paramount connection of immunology and AIR data as a webinar, speaking to the connection of the two.
Yeah, completely agree. So last but not least, one of the other things that has come up in more than one talk are sort of our core values of promoting fair and open science. And I think some of the points that were raised around this topic include potentially revising some of our value statements and mission statements to be more inclusive of some of these concepts, to potentially create a forum for discussion about fair principles of data sharing, open science, and also to have maybe some type of collaborative work between the meetings, subcommittee, legal and ethics working group, and executive subcommittee around this topic. And really, and then Jamie, I think, put, as usual, kind of hit the nail on the head by saying, this is all great. We can talk the talk, but how do we walk the walk? So how do we actually implement things? So any comments from attendees or panelists about this topic? Wow, 76 notes in the chat. That's pretty good.
Yeah, the chat is going wild on several different topics that are not necessarily anymore on the in line with what we're talking about
right now. Okay, but this is great. This is what we want. We want people to do this. So I would say, since we are running a little bit late at this point, this was the last of the hot topics. And I think now what I'm going to do is pass the baton back over, if I may, to Pam, who's going to provide you with some information about instructions for voting, review the agenda briefly for tomorrow, and then explain to all of us how this networking session is going to work. So with that, let me stop my slide share.